In the early years of the Cold War, the most dangerous battles were not fought on open battlefields. They were fought in shadows, hidden from the public eye, buried beneath layers of secrecy, and conducted by people whose names would never appear in newspapers. When Fidel Castro rose to power in Cuba, Washington grew deeply uneasy. Just 150 kilometers from the coast of Florida, the island sat uncomfortably close to American soil. The fear spreading through Washington was not just geographical. A communist government operating at such close range threatened to shift the entire balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. The United States needed to act, but how? The first answer came in April 1961. A covert military operation using Cuban exile forces trained and equipped by American intelligence. The plan rested on the critical assumption that once the invasion began, ordinary Cuban citizens would rise up and join the attackers as liberators. That assumption was wrong. Castro's security networks had already detected signs of the operation before a single boot touched Cuban soil. When the invasion force landed at the Bay of Pigs, everything unraveled almost immediately. Air support was inconsistent, reinforcements failed to arrive, communication between units broke down completely. Cuban military forces loyal to Castro quickly encircled the attackers, and within days the operation had collapsed entirely. The world watched in real time. For the Kennedy administration, the consequences were severe. The United States faced sharp criticism both at home and abroad. More dangerously, the failure sent a clear signal to Moscow. American intelligence could be miscalculated, exposed, and beaten. The Cold War silent front has just grown far more complicated. Inside Washington, the strategic conversation shifted fast. A direct military strike on Cuba was now politically and strategically off the table. Soviet influence on the island was quickly growing, and any open assault risked triggering an escalation that neither side was prepared to manage. American planners needed different kind of weapon, one that couldn't be traced, one that worked from the inside out. The answer was covert warfare. Rather than deploying visible military forces, intelligence agencies began developing methods designed to weaken Cuba gradually, attacking its economic foundation, disrupting its political confidence, and eroding public trust in the revolutionary government. The theory was straightforward. If a system could be destabilized from within, regime collapse might occur without the need for another invasion. That thinking gave birth to Operation Mongoose. This was no single mission. It was a carefully structured, multi-layered covert program led primarily by the CIA and overseen politically by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Even its name carried meaning. The mongoose, a creature known for hunting snakes, was chosen as a deliberate symbol, a reference to confronting what American planners viewed as the creeping threat of communist influence across the hemisphere. Mongoose was not built around one tactic. It was designed as a coordinated framework, combining sabotage, physiological pressure, economic disruption, and deep intelligence operations into one unified shadow campaign. The silent war against Cuba had officially begun. With the framework in place, American intelligence agencies moved from planning to execution, but turning strategy into results would prove far more difficult than Washington had anticipated. Cuba's sugar industry became one of the earliest targets. As the backbone of the island's economy and its primary source of international trade, disrupting agricultural production seemed like a clean path toward internal instability. Sugar mills were sabotaged, processing facilities were attacked. The goal was economic suffocation, slow, invisible, and deniable. As American agencies worked to build covert networks capable of mapping Cuba's military and political structures from the inside, simultaneously physiological warfare filled the airwaves. Radio broadcasts beamed anti-government messages into Cuban territory, designed to erode public confidence and encourage political dissent from within. Information campaigns ran alongside intelligence infiltration efforts as American agencies worked to build covert networks capable of mapping Cuba's military and political structures from the inside. But Cuba was watching. Castro's counterintelligence apparatus was sharp, disciplined, and deeply effective. Suspected infiltration channels were monitored continuously. Exile networks operating beyond Cuba's borders were attacked and dismantled. Many operations were identified and neutralized before they could take root. Rather than collapsing under pressure, the Cuban government grew more centralized, more vigilant, and periodically more unified. Then came the most controversial chapter of Mongoose entirely. Behind the closed doors, American intelligence planners began discussing something far darker: the elimination of Fidel Castro himself. Proposals surfaced, some disturbingly simple, others almost unbelievable in their complexity. Poisoned objects, biological concepts, chemical methods, all of them shared one common goal: remove Castro without leaving any visible trace of American involvement. None of them worked. Castro's personal security was ironclad. His movements were unpredictable. His intelligence identified and neutralized suspected opposition cells before they could act. Every attempt dissolved before it could become a reality. And the broader campaign told the same story. Instead of fracturing Cuban society, the constant external pressure handed Castro a powerful political narrative. He told his people of relentless foreign aggression against the revolution. The harder Mongoose pushed, the stronger the Cuban government's grip on its population became. The shadow of war was intensifying, but it was not going according to plan. Then in 1962, the stakes changed dramatically. The Soviet Union made a strategic decision that would shake the entire world. Nuclear missile systems were secretly deployed inside Cuba, partly as a defensive measure and partly as a bold projection of Soviet power directly into America's backyard. American reconnaissance aircraft eventually detected the missile installation, and the discovery triggered what the world would come to know as the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 tense days, humanity stood at the edge of nuclear war. Naval blockade forces surrounded Cuba. Military units across multiple continents were placed on heightened alert. Diplomatic communication between Washington and Moscow became the fragile thread separating crisis from catastrophe. Historians have long debated how Operation Mongoose contributed to this movement. Some analysts argue that the relentless covert pressure gave the Soviet Union stronger motivation to reinforce Cuba's defenses. Others believe Moscow's decision was driven primarily by broader Cold War competition, largely independent of American covert actions. The truth likely contains elements of both. What the crisis demonstrated beyond all debate was this: covert operations do not exist in the isolation. They interact with open geopolitical forces in ways that are difficult to predict and nearly impossible to control. By 1963, Operation Mongoose had begun to lose momentum. The assassination of President Kennedy in November of that year fundamentally altered American political priorities. Without the centralized political support that had driven the operation forward, the large-scale coordination required for Mongoose gradually dissolved. Covert activities related to Cuba did not disappear entirely, but the program no longer functioned as the integrated strategic campaign. Fidel Castro remained in power, not for months, not for years, but for decades, outlasting Kennedy, outlasting the Cold War itself, and outlasting nearly every American administration that had sought to remove him. Operation Mongoose ultimately failed to achieve its primary objective, but its legacy extended far beyond failure. It became one of the most studied examples of the limitation of covert warfare, a demonstration that political systems are not always vulnerable to pressure applied through secrecy alone. Sometimes sustained external pressure does not break a government. Sometimes it gives that government exactly the narrative it needs to survive. History would remember Operation Mongoose as one of the most ambitious covert campaigns of the Cold War era, a program born from frustration, driven by fear, and undone by the very complexity it tried to exploit. Because power, as the Cold War repeatedly proved, is never as simple as force.